Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome in to an RTI Post-Game Reaction podcast. I don't have the equipment and the necessary time and stuff to do a post-game reaction show live, so I want to do something with you guys. So I am Nathaniel Rutherford, joined by Ben McKee. So it's not just going to be me; it's going to be me and Ben. So Ben, welcome to the post-game reaction RTI show here. And what a game! I'm still kind of, I guess, reeling a little bit after it's over. We're recording this probably not even an hour after the game itself has actually ended. Tennessee comes from behind, trailing 22-9, well over halfway through the fourth quarter. The ESPN win probability had Indiana with a 97.6% chance of winning the game. I think around the 9:22 mark in the fourth quarter. It was still around 94.7%. I think when Garantano threw an incomplete pass in the red zone with about 5:52 to go. And that's when things turned around. Tennessee somehow, Ben, comes back and wins 23-22. And what I think is, I guess, probably a microcosm of the entire 2019 season for Tennessee, where Tennessee pulls off the improbable. They begin the season 1-4, and somehow, some way, end up 8-5. And this one's probably, I'd say this game's probably the most bizarre of Tennessee's 8 wins this season. You could look at, I mean, you had some close contests against Kentucky, some close contests against Missouri, but this one to me it was kind of the opposite of the BYU game. I think you could look at it as the polar opposite of the BYU game, where Tennessee struggled in that game for a lot of it, couldn't quite convert, and they left a lot of points on the board, just like in this game. But unlike that game, Tennessee's defense in this one stood strong, didn't allow the big play to break their back, and in the end of it, Tennessee somehow emerges victorious.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly, saying that this game was a microcosm of Tennessee's season, because in one way, Tennessee had no business winning that football game, and on the other hand, Tennessee had no business losing that football game. It was a really weird game that I still don't understand how Tennessee won. I think Tennessee, when they look back on this performance, can thank its defense for keeping the offense and the team overall in the game as long as possible, waiting for Jarrett Garantano to shake out the cobwebs, because there was definitely a rust factor with JG, as we saw. I mean, it was just a terrible performance through 3 quarters for JG. Missed a couple of receivers, a couple of late throws, obviously had the pick six, had the interception where the offensive line, the left side of the offensive line, got blown up and didn't do JG any favors, but JG has to just take the sack there instead of just kind of throwing the ball up. And then, as I mentioned, he comes back and throws a pick six. So a miserable 3 quarters to start the game for JG. And then he bounces back, and with help from Eric Gray, with help from the offensive line, obviously a tremendous onside kick from Paxton Brooks. Eric Gray does a great job recovering the onside kick. JG is able to bounce back and have 2 very productive drives there with the help of his teammates. So I don't know how Tennessee football won that game, but just as you mentioned, we're doing this an hour after the game ended or so, and just my immediate reaction is that Tennessee's defense just played really well, well enough to keep the offense in the game, allow Juwan Jennings to get out there and make a couple of plays, and just the defense keeping the offense in the game just long enough for them to shake off the rush, shake off the cobwebs, and get everything sorted out, allowed Tennessee to win the football game. And then obviously the huge special teams play that I already talked about.
Yeah, the first onside kick recovery in the Jeremy Pruitt era, they tried so many different times, and it was the most perfectly executed one of them all. I mean, they were all really good calls, and just had 1 or 2 things just not happen for Tennessee to recover them. Most of them in 2018. I think Tennessee's not really tried hardly any this year up until this game, obviously. And then it happens. And this is also, to the opposite side of Indiana special teams. This is the second time this season, Ben, where a missed PAT came back to haunt a Tennessee opponent. I think it was in the Kentucky game where they missed the PAT, and it made them have to go for a touchdown rather than a field goal late in that game, and then Tennessee made that goal line stand. In this game, Indiana missed the PAT. I think it was in the third quarter. I'm trying to remember when that was. It was actually, it was in the third quarter when they took the 16-6 lead. And I said at the time, I think on the RTI account, that could prove huge if Tennessee could ever actually get into the end zone. And Tennessee finally did get into the end zone, and it did prove huge because that missed PAT was the difference between this game going into potentially overtime or Tennessee winning, and it came up huge. I mean, that's the second time this season. Just the improbability of it all, not just the win percentage of Tennessee trailing with 5 minutes to go. And I'm trying to pull up a stat here because there is a stat from ESPN. Here we go, from SportsCenter. Entering tonight's matchup, FBS teams were 0-471 when trailing by 13-plus points in the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter of this season. 471 times a team had trailed by 13 or more points in the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. Tennessee became the first team out of 472 teams to somehow get a victory in that situation. I don't know, but the first thing that popped in my head when Tennessee scored that touchdown and had the lead was that this felt like the 2014 South Carolina game all over again. But I actually think this might have been, with the way Tennessee's offense was playing in this entire game, I think this actually might have been more improbable than that 2014 South Carolina game, because that game to me was the most improbable comeback I've seen, just in my lifetime as a Vol fan and as a Vol media member. But I think this one might top it. Just like I said, just because of the way Tennessee's offense had really just not been getting anything done for most of the game. Yeah,
and in that South Carolina game, it was kind of the defense that was really a big issue for the Vols, and Derek Barnett, and I think it was Jalen Reeves-Maven had a couple of big plays there. Or no, Corey Vereen, I think it was.
Yeah.
Derek Barnett and somebody had a couple of huge plays there at the end to help Tennessee win the game.
Yeah, in overtime, I know Barnett and Majid had 2 sacks.
Yeah, that's right.
Period.
Yeah, I was thinking of Kurt Majid, but and then obviously Dobbs and Jalen Hurd had a couple of big plays there. But no, not only did it feel like the South Carolina comeback in a positive way, in a negative way, it felt like the BYU game in the sense of Tennessee was leaving a lot of points out on the field in the first half. And I say Tennessee, but it was, I mean, if you really want to break it down, it was really just Jarrett Garantano. The offensive line did not perform great. They weren't bad in the first half, but they weren't great either. They did JG no favors, but they did not, throw the football late to 2 or 3 wide open receivers, not wide open, but open enough receivers in the end zone to where it should have been touchdowns instead of field goals. So, like the BYU game, it should have been 21-0. Points are left on the field. You let Indiana hang around and have some hope that they can come back. And what do you know? Indiana makes a big play, a splash play here or there. They have momentum, and then all of a sudden they have a 2-score lead. And Tennessee was able to overcome adversity, whereas in the BYU game, it created its own adversity, and it was not able to overcome that adversity. So it reminded me of the BYU game as well, but just with a different outcome. And I think one similarity in that game that stood out to me, and I say similarity in the sense of it was a particular player that played a large role in the win against Indiana and the loss against BYU, but their performance was completely different in each game, and that was Alontae Taylor. Alontae Taylor played horrible football against BYU and obviously allowed the big pass play to allow BYU to set up the game-winning score against Indiana. I mean, he was huge. He had the coverage locked down all night, and then he had the big sack on, I believe it was second down on that last Indiana possession. So Alontae Taylor was huge, and that game resembled the BYU game in a lot of ways, but obviously the huge difference is that Tennessee found a way to overcome the adversity it created and finish with a win.
There's just so much to take away from this game. You could look at, like I said, just kind of the improbability of everything that happened with Tennessee getting the ball back late in the game. They're late in the fourth quarter trying to run out the clock, and then you had the Brandon Kennedy moved ball before the snap that was a snap infraction that stopped the clock, so Tennessee wasn't able to run down the clock even more before they punted, so that the clock froze at 1 minute 2 seconds. I don't think, obviously that wasn't, they don't put that on proof. That was Brandon Kennedy just making a dumb mistake there. But my goodness, that happened. You had it was just kind of really, really weird. And as we're recording this, Ben, the news just came out that Brandon Kennedy has said he is granted a 6th year of eligibility. So that's some good news as we're doing this post-game podcast. So some just more good news with Tennessee tonight, and what's already been a good night. But Ben, I know you will have plenty of time to talk about this with Jason Swain on the Swain event when you all come out on Friday morning and talk about it. But what is your biggest takeaway from this game? Is it the defense? Is it Eric Gray making some big plays and standing out? And obviously he scored the game-winning touchdown. But even before that, he made some big plays. Ty Chandler at one point on one of Tennessee's drives was a first down machine, both on the ground and through the air. I don't even know what my biggest takeaway overall from this game is. I think, to me, it would be the change in mentality, like you said, the change in the attitude of the team from even just this season, from the BYU game to this one, where I think defensively, to me, I think that's my biggest takeaway, is just how different the defense has been playing from the first month of the season through the last really month and a half, 2 months of the season now. And I think that, to me, would be my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is pretty similar, and it was kind of what I was touching on a moment ago with Tennessee's ability to overcome adversity. The football team, the Tennessee football team that played in the month of September against Georgia State, BYU, Florida, and yes, they beat UTC, but they didn't even look all that great in that game. That football team does not win tonight against Indiana. That football team at that point in the season did not know how to overcome adversity. And as crazy as it sounds, as unfortunate of events as it was, as painful as it was as a Tennessee fan, Tennessee needed to lose to Georgia State. Tennessee needed to lose to BYU the way it did. Tennessee needed to be embarrassed by Florida. Tennessee needed to have a poor performance and a win over UTC in order to teach itself how to win. And obviously that trickled into October as well, with the loss to Georgia, with the rogue play by Jarrett Garantano at Alabama. But Tennessee needed those mishaps in order to learn how to overcome adversity. And I said it after the Kentucky game. Without those losses, Tennessee doesn't beat Kentucky. Well, without those losses, Tennessee doesn't beat Indiana either, because it taught itself how to overcome adversity, how to play together when things aren't going their way. So I think that's my biggest takeaway, is that this football team, I think it finally knows how to win football games, because, you know, the Tennessee football teams of the Butch Jones era and the Derek Dooley era, maybe even the Lane Kiffin era, just that one season, because he didn't necessarily have a full toolbox to work with. Those football teams didn't know how to win, and they would have lost those close games that Tennessee played in this year against Kentucky, against Indiana, against South Carolina there for a minute, against Mississippi State there down the stretch. Those football teams would have found a way to lose those games in some ridiculous fashion, or as what we call it in Tennessee fashion, typical Tennessee fashion. So this football team learned how to win. This football team learned how to overcome adversity, and I thought tonight's game just really showed that. And on top of that, but I think it also shows just how much Jeremy Pruitt has evolved as a head coach. And I mentioned that because a lot of people, including myself, was baffled by his decision to put Jarrett Garantano back in the game tonight. Yeah. And at the time, I kind of thought it was the wrong decision, simply because I thought at that point you would have completely messed up Jarrett Garantano's mindset. I mean, he was already lacking confidence. You could tell by his play, but I thought bringing him back into the game after you benched him was just going to even more so really just kill his confidence. And same with Brian Maurer as well. But Jeremy Pruitt made the unpopular decision to go with Jarrett Garantano, just as he did in the Kentucky game, and it paid off with wins in both games. And, you know, Brian Maurer didn't throw interceptions, but he should have thrown two of them. He's lucky that Indiana had butter on their hands, and the football slipped right through their hands. Those should have been two interceptions for the Hoosiers. And I'm not trying to, say that his mistakes are worse than JG's, because they're not. Brian Maurer's a true freshman. JG's now he's a fifth-year senior, so obviously there's a little leeway there. JG should not be making the same mistakes as Brian Maurer. But on JG's interception, at least the pick six, I mean, it was just a poor throw in terms of accuracy. With Brian Maurer, I mean, he stared down both guys on both plays and was trying to force it to Jawan Jennings, and it should have been picked off at that time, and he got lucky with the receiver dropping the ball. So I thought Jeremy Pruitt showed his growth as a head coach in this football game as well with the decisions that he made.
This game was just so weird because in the first half, like you mentioned there with Garantano struggles and stuff too, in the first half especially, it just seemed like Tennessee was just such the better team. And I think, obviously, looking at the stats, looking at just watching the game with your eyes, Tennessee was a better team in this game. I mean, they were better than just 1 point. I'm saying that this game should have been. Tennessee had better quarterback play in the first half, just like we both have touched on here, like with the BYU game. Tennessee has a 2, maybe even 3 score advantage in the first half at one point because you could at least had 1 touchdown, if not 2, in the red zone there. Tennessee had their first 3 red zone trips. They came with 6 points. The first one, they had a 4th down attempt that was no good, and they came away with 2 field goals later on. So 3 red zone attempts, 2 field goals. You get another field goal that I think was a 43-yarder by Brenton Samaglia later on in the game. Tennessee didn't score a single touchdown of the game until the 4:21 mark in the fourth quarter, and then they scored 2 in a matter of 30 seconds of game time. And just there's so much craziness to pull away from this game, so much just stuff to try to unpack here. You had Tennessee lining up or jumping off sides, I think 4 different times in this game. 7 penalties for 55 yards for Tennessee in this game. But then Indiana themselves had some shoot themselves in the foot penalties with 6 for 46. Tennessee's defense, I don't think we talked about this yet. Indiana came into this game, we talked about their passing numbers and kind of their overall offensive numbers. They came into this game as one of the best third down offenses in the entire country. They were, I think, 9th in the FBS. Out of 130 FBS teams, they were 9th in third down conversions. I think with like 48.2% conversion rate this season. Tennessee held them to 4 of 13 on third down. I mean, that is huge. Tennessee actually had more plays on offense than Indiana. Indiana came into this game with a huge play discrepancy. I think they'd run like 125 more plays on offense than Tennessee had this season. They were averaging about 6.1 yards per play. Tennessee held them to 4.7 yards per play. I don't think you can talk enough about the defense. Guys like Sean Schamberger, he had a phenomenal first half in this game, and he had a good game overall. Darrell Taylor finished off his Tennessee career strong with a sack and a half, 2 tackles for loss, and 6 overall tackles and a quarterback hurry too. David Batuli finished strong, 6 tackles, a half a tackle for loss, and a quarterback hurry. I mean, Ben, there were so many. Like I said, there's so many things to just take away from this game, but it's just, to me, if one more thing goes against Tennessee, they don't win this game. They had so much things that was, whether it was their own fault or not, that went against them, but they had just enough. I mean, just enough by inches in some cases, just enough go their way, and they came out with a victory. I don't, I think a good conversation to have now is, what does this momentum do for Tennessee in this offseason? Because, I'll try to wrap it up here. I don't want to keep this too long because we're recording this obviously late at night, and Ben, you got to be up early for Swain's show in the morning. So it's gonna be a fun, interesting 24 plus hours here for Tennessee football coverage. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Tennessee in this offseason, because now looking at Tennessee with 8-5, I think you all covered it on the Swain event on Thursday morning. I think like the bottom 3 teams in the AP poll, the number 25, 24, and 23 teams, have all lost this postseason. I think there's a very good chance Tennessee not only finishes this season right there in the tail end of the top 25 in the CFP poll, the AP poll, either one. But I think there's a decent chance, depending on what happens roster-wise and stuff this offseason, I think there's a decent chance you see Tennessee come back into the 2020 season still ranked as a top 25 team, barely in there. But I think there's a chance now that Tennessee is a ranked team at the beginning of the 2020 season. And I don't know if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's a thing that could be happening for Tennessee here in the next coming months.
Yeah, I think on both accounts, Tennessee will be ranked. Next week or whenever I guess it would be the week after. I think the AP poll comes out after the national championship game, which is next Monday, January 13th, a week from this Monday. So what is that? 10 or so days. I think Tennessee will be ranked. I mean, they're 8-5. They won 6 straight games. They're playing great football right now. I think they are a top 25 team right now. And then looking ahead to next season, I definitely think Tennessee will be ranked, because the two things that media members rank teams in the top 25 to start the season based off of is momentum from a bowl game and returning players. And Tennessee has momentum from a bowl game. They just beat Indiana in the TaxSlayer Bowl. They're now 8-5. They won 6 straight, so they've got momentum going into next season. And then you look at them defensively, and they return 8 of 11 starters. You're missing 3 key guys in Daniel Batuli, Nigel Warrior, and Gerald Taylor. But, national media members will see the 8 of 11, and they won't necessarily dive in and look at how big of a piece of the defense Tennessee will be losing. And we'll see if Tennessee is able to replace their production. But those are 3 big pieces at each level of the defense that Tennessee is going to be replacing. But the national media won't see that kind of when looking at Tennessee's resume. And then you flip over to the offensive side of the ball. You just mentioned, Nathaniel, that Brandon Kennedy is coming back. What if Trey Smith comes back? Then you have I'm interested to see what Riley Locklear does after spring practice. But I think you probably have your top 7 or 8 offensive linemen returning if Trey Smith returns, with Wanye at left tackle, Trey Smith at left guard, Brandon Kennedy at center, Kayron Calvert or Jerome Carvin at right guard, and Darnell Wright at right tackle. And then I just mentioned Riley Locklear. How far along does Chris Progene come? You lose Dominic Wood-Anderson. Darnell Washington picked Georgia today, but you have Sean Brown, you have Jackson Lowe, you have Princeton Fant, you have Jacob Warren. I'm sure there will be some attrition there. You have Austin Pope. He'll probably be the starting tight end next season. You have 7 running backs, and as of right now, you have all of your top 3 guys returning, and that's another position kind of like the tight end where I'm sure there will be some attrition. But you have your top 3 guys coming back. And then you look at the quarterback position, and, Jerry Garantano opinion aside, he's a 5th-year quarterback who has played a ton of football. From a national media perspective, they'll see returning starting quarterback with a returning offensive line, returning set of running backs, and that team will definitely be a top 25 team, in my opinion. You return the kicker, the punter. You do lose Jawan Jennings and Marquez Callaway, obviously, but Brandon Johnson, D'Angelo Gibbs. You saw Ramel Keaton make a couple of plays today. So I think on paper, Tennessee definitely has the resume of a top 25 team in the preseason next year.
Yeah, you're talking about what Tennessee loses, and they're obviously losing a lot of senior leadership from Batuli, Warrior, Jennings, Callaway. But you look tonight on offense, especially I was curious about the stats here. Tennessee's 3, senior guys on offense, the 3 main, I guess, pass-catching targets on offense that are seniors, Juwan Jennings, Marquez Callaway, and Dominic Wood-Anderson, they finished with a combined 4 catches tonight. Jennings obviously missed the first half. He finished with 2 for 27, and you could tell Tennessee was trying to force-feed him a little bit there, and it cost him a couple different times. Maurer tried to force it in there. It should have been picked off, and it wasn't. Garantano tried to force it in there to him, too, and it ended up being a pick 6, but he finished with 2 for 27. Callaway had 1 for 19, and it was a big catch. It was another one of those things where he had an incredible catch. He was targeted 7 times tonight and only had 1 catch, and most of them, weren't his fault. But Wood Anderson had 1 for 2. That's it from your senior guys. Your leading receiver tonight was a guy who's, probably going to be back next season, and Josh Palmer with 6 catches for 68 yards. You mentioned Ramel Keaton, 2 catches for 60 yards. He had a huge 46-yard reception, and then his other catch was a 14-yarder that was for a first down as well. So I don't think, obviously I think Tennessee's receiving core is going to take a step back because you're losing 2 guys who are going to be drafted, and Dominic Wood-Anderson has, I guess, an outside chance of probably getting drafted just because he presents a unique physical attributes and whatnot. But you're losing 2 NFL draft picks, so it's not, you can't say Tennessee's not going to have a step back, but I don't think it's going to be as big of a step back as we were all anticipating at the beginning of the season because, as you said, Brandon Johnson is redshirting. That's giving you an experienced guy there. Josh Palmer has come on pretty strong here at the end of the season. He needs to carry that momentum and be more consistent next year, but he has potential. Ramel Keaton shown flashes this year. Cedric Tillman, I think, has shown a few flashes at different times. You're bringing in a couple other good speed guys with Jimmy Callaway and Jalen Hyatt in this class. I think I agree with you, Ben. I think this team right now, as it stands, is one of the top 25 teams in college football, and I think they should be probably one of the top 25 teams in college football heading into the preseason of next year. But a lot could change. You could have some roster attrition, you could have coaching changes and stuff that could alter some of that too. But Ben, before we close out here, any other closing thoughts? I think I'll have something that I'll want to share. But any closing thoughts from you on this before we end the post-game show?
Yeah, me personally, I don't think I talked about Eric Gray enough. I know you mentioned him today, but Eric Gray was just tremendous. And a moment ago, I talked about Tennessee having 7 running backs. When you look at, the 3 guys, Eric Gray, Tim Jordan, and Ty Chandler, they'll have Carlin Fields and me back, who redshirted. Who knows if he switches positions, but he'll be in the room. Then you add Laneith Whitehead, you add Jabari Small, you add Tia Hodge. That's 7 running backs, and again, I'm sure there will be some attrition. I'm sure there will be some guys switching positions. Who knows? Maybe even Jeremy Banks makes it 8 guys. But I think we know one thing following the Vanderbilt game and the bowl game, and that's Eric Gray is your number 1 back going into next season. I think Ty Chandler and Tim Jordan are capable backs in the SEC. I don't think they're good enough to be your number 1 back, but I think that they're good complementary pieces to Eric Gray, and I think that is a really nice, foundation for the running game next season. We know how much running the football means to Jeremy Pruitt. We know how crucial it is to be successful in running the football in the SEC, and I think Eric Gray has the ability to really carry the offense in that department, especially with a returning offensive line. Say what you will about JG, but Pruitt has talked about on numerous occasions his ability to check Tennessee's offense into the right run plays, and make sure that the blockers and the defenders are accounted for, and make sure that they're not running into a side where that there aren't enough hats to match a hat. So I think Tennessee's running game with Eric Gray leading the way has a great potential going into next season, and that's a great building block for a team that loses so much production through the air. He was tremendous tonight. He has great football IQ. You saw him running the football and his ability to just stop on a dime and make a cut. But how about his football IQ? And as Tim Hasselback, noted on the broadcast, but on the onside kick, he recovers it, but he was in position to recover the football when the football was at about 8 or 9 yards. And if he picks it up right there, Tennessee doesn't recover it legally, and Indiana gets the ball back. Who knows what happens at that point? But his football IQ kicked in, and I think that you can legitimately see him sit there and kind of watch the ball get past the 10-yard line, the 10-yard marker that it needed to go, and then he picks up the football, and Tennessee's able to recover that football. I think back to the Missouri game in 2014 where Tennessee recovered 2 onside kicks, but one was offsides and one was illegal touching. Eric Gray didn't let that happen, and it was the difference in the football game. So you talked about Eric Gray. I did not talk about him enough. He was the MVP by the Gator Bowl, but obviously he was the MVP by anybody watching. I mean, he is a huge reason as to why Tennessee won tonight.
100% agree with you on that one. I think he, like you said, it wasn't even just his game-winning touchdown. It wasn't even just some of the runs he had there, the explosive ability. As you said, it was that onside kick recovery he had. He is going to be special, and he's going to be fun to watch. He should be, as you said, Tennessee's number 1 guy next year, regardless of what happens with Tim Jordan and Ty Chandler. Chandler had some good plays tonight, don't get me wrong. He finished with 12 carries for 35 yards. He also had 3 catches for 24 yards. There was a drive there where every first down that had happened for Tennessee, it was by Ty Chandler, whether it was a run or a reception. He had, I think, like 4 or 5 first downs on that one drive alone. So Chandler still made some plays tonight, but Gray just brings an explosiveness that nobody else on this roster has right now. And maybe Tennessee, adding guys like Jimmy Holiday and whatnot will have that more than just Gray next year. But right now, this current team, Gray had an ability that no one else did. Finished the game with 16 total touches for over 100 total yards of offense for him, and the game-winning touchdown, and like we said, the onside kick recovery as well. My biggest takeaway, my final thoughts here too, is I agree with you 100% on Eric Gray. I'm also going to be very intrigued to see what happens with this quarterback situation in this offseason, because we both have talked about Garantano a little bit here. He made the plays when it mattered down the stretch there. He had a rough start, but I think he was like, I'm sure he was like 5 of 6 or something like that on Tennessee's final couple of possessions there. I'm looking at, he was at one point, he was 5 or 6 of 6 there late in the fourth quarter as Tennessee was driving to on that 10-play drive there, and then he ended up I think making one more completion after that to Josh Palmer as well on Tennessee's last possession, where they scored like in 28 seconds and went 54 yards and scored in 28 seconds. So he finished the fourth quarter strong. He didn't complete a single pass in the third quarter. I think he only had like one attempt in the third quarter, but he didn't complete a single pass in the third quarter. Well, he did. It was a pick six though, but he didn't complete to his team in the third quarter. Then he kind of sacked himself in late in the third quarter there. Like I said, comes back in the fourth quarter, finishes the game strong. But I'm going to be very interested to see Tennessee's quarterback situation. I know this maybe not I guess I wouldn't say it's a negative either, but it's not necessarily the biggest positive in the podcast on. But I think Harrison Bailey, I don't know how ready he's going to be to win the starting job, but he's going to be given every opportunity to do so. And I think if he shows that he is less, interception prone, or I guess kind of risk averse than what Brian Maurer does, because if Brian Maurer can make slightly better reads and doesn't throw, like we said tonight, he didn't throw an interception, but he should have had 2 passes picked off, and there were several other times as other games where he could have or should have had passes picked off, and he finished this year with 2 touchdowns and 5 picks. If he was a little less, I guess, loose with the ball, he probably would have nailed down Tennessee's starting job, and if he obviously hadn't suffered the 2 concussions he did too, but he probably would have stolen the job away from Garantano, because he has better overall arm talent, more moxie, more pocket presence, better mobility. But Maurer just was a true freshman and made true freshman mistakes. If Harrison Bailey comes in, and I think he is a more polished prospect as it is, because he's been at it since about the 7th, 8th grade as far as being on the national radar. I'm just very curious to see what happens with Tennessee's quarterback room this spring, because you're going to have everybody there. It's not like you're going to have a guy coming in as a late addition in the summer for the fall. You're going to have everyone in there. Both your quarterback prospects from this 2019 class, or 2020 class, are early enrollees. Both Harrison Bailey and Jimmy Holiday are early enrollees, so they're going to be there for spring. You're going to have Garantano back, Shrout, Maurer, Kasim Hill. You're going to have all those guys there. So I think this spring is going to be a very fun time to watch Tennessee's quarterback room. But I think we'll go ahead and end that here to let Ben go get some sleep, or a little bit of sleep before the Swain event in the morning. Tennessee somehow, someway caps off an improbable season with a just as improbable, if not even more so, victory in the 2020 TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. Somehow coming back, stunning Indiana 23-22 to finish the season 8-5 after starting 1-4. Ben, I didn't think we'd be here at the end of this season, but here we are, and Tennessee comes into the offseason with tons of momentum, and I think it could be very fun to watch what Tennessee could do this 2021 recruiting class. But signing off for Ben McKee, I am Nathaniel Rutherford, and this has been the RTI Post-Game Reaction Show.